increase in blood pressure and the resultant increase in the amount of blood that is going to exit the heart with every beat. So just have a look at it. And, you know, if you're not going to be specifically tested on it, I just want to get you to have the basic ideas of how changes in blood pressure can affect heart rate, and that control actually is coming from the cardiac center in the medulla oblongata. Okay. Now, one other thing that we can see with the heart when we have changes in heart rate, we can also have effects of other substances in the body besides neurotransmitters from the nervous system. Hormones can also have an effect on heart rate. If our adrenal medulla releases adrenaline, one of the things that adrenaline will do is cause an increase in heart rate. It can actually directly affect cardiac muscle tissue, cause it to contract more rapidly, and also cause it to contract more forcefully. But I want to look at a reflex. Okay, a reflex that occurs occasionally, okay, and it's called a Bainbridge reflex. All right, and what is the Bainbridge reflex? It actually says that the more blood you put into the heart, the more you put blood into the heart, the more the walls of the heart will stretch out. Okay, that makes sense. It's like the more you blow up a balloon, the more balloon walls will stretch out. Same thing with the heart, but there are receptors in the myocardium of the atria. And when you increase the amount of blood that's going into the heart, the atria start to stretch. Also, the ventricles will stretch as well. And those receptors cause a reflex. And this reflex means when you have increased blood in those chambers, with increased pressure in those chambers, increased stretching of the myocardial wall, a signal goes to the actual spinal cord, and the signal comes back from the spinal cord to the muscle, and what happens is it tells the muscle to contract more forcefully. Okay? So this is the reflex. Increased volume, increased blood pressure to the heart will cause the myocardium to contract more forcefully. This reflex is one of the things that is a problem for people with hypertension. If you have high blood pressure, continuous high blood pressure will make these receptors triggered. It will cause an increased pressure and increased stretching and increased reflex. And that can ultimately overstress the heart and put it into failure. Okay? That is a reflex. And here it is again. That particular reflex is governed by something called the Frank-Starling law. You're not going to be specifically tested on this, but sometimes this law, the name of this law comes up in a lot of nursing exams. Again, it's referring to the increased stretch of the myocardium, resulting in an increased force of contraction. This is a reflex. The more blood you put inside the heart, the more pressure you put inside of those chambers, the more that muscle wall is stretched outward, the more forcefully it will contract to force that blood out. Okay, and that's the Frank-Starling law. Okay, and it is one of the things that helps the heart compensate for increased blood flow, hypertension, and so forth. We're going to take over our chart here, and I just want to get rid of this. Okay, so that is our heart lecture. We're going to move from here to the circulation lecture. We'll just get started on it, and then we'll finish it up in the classroom after lunch. Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions about the heart so far? We just went over the basics.
Explain venous return.
Actually, venous return is to the heart in terms of the structures that it goes through. The venous return to the heart is going to come through two different vessels. The inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava to the right side of the heart. Let me just get it up here. And the pulmonary vein to the left side of the heart. Okay? So, venous return. Blood is returning to the heart from systemic circulation, from the lower torso and the upper body through the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava. This is deoxygenated blood, and it's going to the right side of the heart. The right side of the heart will then pump the blood to the lungs to get oxygen, to become oxygenated. But at the same time blood is returning from the body, blood is also returning from the lungs. Oxygenated blood is returning to the pulmonary veins to the heart, and this is highly oxygenated blood. This will return to the left side of the heart, into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle will pump it in towards the body system. Okay? So from pulmonary circulation, we're returning to the left side. From systemic circulation, we return to the right side. Okay? And essentially, it's just a pattern of how blood goes to the heart from the body, then to the lungs to get oxygen, then goes back to the heart to return throughout the body. Is that what you were asking? Yeah. Okay. Now, if you're going to start exercising, right? Once you start moving your muscles, and we'll see in our next circulation lecture, when you start moving your muscles, the actual contraction of your skeletal muscles actually forces more blood from your veins to be pushed back to the heart. That increased volume of blood going to the heart from systemic circulation. And yet, instead of that sudden increase in volume going to the atria and then into the ventricles, that increased volume will increase the pressure in those chambers and cause this side of the heart wall to stretch out. And because you have that increased pressure and increased stretch of the myocardium, we have our vein bridge reflex and our Frank-Starling law, and the result is an increased force of contraction and an increase in heart rate to force that blood to the lungs to get oxygen and back to the heart. And that's how, as soon as you start to exercise, your heart rate increases. And that's because of the increased blood being forced to your heart from your skeletal muscle. Actually pumping it, forcing it physically back to the heart.
Well, one of the factors of increased venous return is exercise. That's one of the factors of increased venous return.
Exercise is one of the things that will increase venous return.
Will increase.
Yeah.
So would that mean increased circulation or just?
Yes, it will, actually, ultimately. But the first thing that happens, and we'll see it when we do our circulation lecture, but we'll see that blood actually, you don't always need to circulate. Every individual has, 4 to 5 liters of blood. You don't need to circulate the whole 4 to 5 liters. You can circulate most of it. The remaining blood tends to be stored in areas like the large veins. And then if you start to exercise and you need the extra blood volume, the veins actually blood in the veins will be forced to the heart every time your muscles contract. It's a physical force. And it's called a muscular pump. And we'll get to that in a second.
So then that reflex you can't because you're going to.
That's right. The reflex will kick in immediately. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of this is review with a few new things, okay, for our circulatory system. We have 2 main blood vessels in the body, arteries and veins. Remember, arteries carry blood away from the heart, and veins carry blood to the heart. Okay? Number 1. Number 2, the cardiovascular system, the circulatory system, is a closed system. That means that of all the structures that are part of the cardiovascular system, the heart and all the different blood vessels, within that system is a liquid blood, a type of connective tissue. And blood will only flow within those structures. It will not be found loose in any spaces of the body. That doesn't happen. Okay. For blood to be transported throughout the body, it's going to move away from the heart through the arteries, and it will go through progressively smaller and smaller arteries until it gets deep into the tissue. The tiniest vessels that are found as part of the cardiovascular system are called capillaries, And these tiny vessels allow the blood to be transported between even layers of cells in the tissue. It's in the capillaries that you will have the exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and waste products. So diffusion will take place, osmosis diffusion, and transport will take place of substances from the bloodstream into the tissues and vice versa. And then the blood will return to the heart, having lost all of its oxygen, and it returns to the veins. And we saw how blood circulates through the heart to the lungs to pick up oxygen. So this lecture is concerned about different blood vessels and their structure. And we're going to first look at the arteries and then we'll look at the veins. Now, last week we actually looked at a slide of a cross-section of an artery and cross-section of a vein. We saw that arteries in general tend to have very thick walls and veins tend to have very thin walls. Because of that, arteries tend to always be held open, and veins, when they have no blood in them, they collapse. And you can actually see that. If you look at the back of your hand and you try and find a vein, if you actually push the blood in the vein, if you find a great, nice big vein, you can actually push the blood away from the heart, and then hold your finger down, and you'll see that there is no blood in the vein will collapse, and then if you let go, the blood will return flowing through the vein and it will pop up again. And that's what happens, the veins collapse when there's no blood in it. Now the arteries themselves, those nice thick walls of the arteries, contain actual 3 layers. And those 3 layers we saw briefly last week. The innermost layer, or the lining of all of the blood vessels, is called the tunica intima. And this is a single layer of squamous epithelial cells. It's known as the endothelium. Okay, and it also lines the heart as well. In fact, the entire cardiovascular system is lined by endothelium. Entire cardiovascular system. And in our blood vessels, we call that layer the tunica intima. In our heart, we call it the endocardium. But it's all the same single layer of squamous cells. The second layer of the artery wall is going to be the tunica media. This middle layer is made of smooth muscle fibers. And in the largest arteries, this layer is the thickest. In tiny little arteries, the layer is actually quite small. And there are elastic fibers mixed in with these smooth muscle fibers. Now remember, smooth muscle is involuntary. Okay, it is not striated like skeletal muscle, and it is under involuntary control. So you do not have control over these smooth muscle fibers. They can contract. And when they contract, when these smooth muscle fibers contract, the result is a narrowing of vessels, it actually helps or holds even smaller vessels to it. We'll have a look at that later. Now, in our largest arteries, there is quite a great amount of elastic fibers found not only in the tunica media, but these elastic fibers can also form their own layers. And here in this image here, they're actually showing 2 layers formed by elastic fibers, the internal elastic membrane and the external elastic membrane. These 2 layers of elastic fibers are found only in the largest arteries, or even the pulmonary arteries. And we'll have a look at that. Now, the largest arteries are very
aorta and the pulmonary artery. And because these arteries are carrying blood away from the heart, we also call them conducting arteries. So when you think about the biggest arteries in the body, think of them as elastic conducting arteries. Okay? And these arteries have all of the layers that we had a look at, plus
muscular arteries are actually able to constrict and dilate much better than our elastic conducting arteries. Okay? And in fact, it's these particular arteries, when they constrict and dilate, actually has the biggest effect on our blood pressure. When they constrict and space inside them gets narrower, blood pressure will go up. When these vessels, when the smooth muscle relaxes and the vessel dilates, blood pressure will drop. So these have the greatest control over our whole systemic blood pressure, these muscular distributing arteries. Okay? Here is an example of a muscular distributing artery. Again, we still have our two layers. We do have some elastic fibers in the tunica media, but not as many as the larger arteries. Okay? And again, we do have blood flowing through the artery when it is under pressure. Blood pressure, but important thing is blood pressure control. Tunica media and smooth muscle fibers, they contract because the space gets smaller, the pressure, but the blood inside goes under higher pressure in that smaller space, and when they relax, the movement gets larger and the blood flows have our control of blood pressure in the vessel. And I just want to note that even though there are fewer elastic fibers, sometimes you still see elastic membrane. Very elastic fibers in different amounts. Depends on what the pressure is. Okay, our third smallest vessel is called an arteriole. Okay? These vessels are actually quite small. If you look at the vessel itself, cross section of it, it's considerably smaller than our muscular arteries. And these particular vessels do have blood flowing through them at pressure. However, we often and if we look at the vessel wall, it still has the three layers. It has the tunica intima, then epithelium, bigger endothelium. It has the tunica media, smooth muscle fibers in the very little elastic tissue, and it has the tunica adventitia. If we look at the cross section, the endothelial cells, which are usually in the endothelial cells, we actually have sometimes one or two layers of smooth muscle cells, and then our tunica adventitia. Now, whereas our muscular distributing arteries was important for control of blood pressure, these arterioles actually are very important for controlling blood flow. So when the smooth muscle of the tunica media contracts and the vessel constricts, it actually can constrict enough to shut off blood flow or reduce blood flow. It doesn't have an effect on blood pressure, but it does have an effect on the flow of blood through that vessel into sections of an organ, sections of a structure. Okay? So it can regulate blood flow. All right. Now, arterioles, note, they are found at entrances to what we call capillary beds. The next smallest artery or vessel that carries blood away from the heart is going to be a capillary, an arterial capillary. And very often, the arterioles branch into many, many tiny capillaries. And I will show you how that works. Okay, here's an arteriole. Look how small it is. Look, we can see a red blood cell right here in the lumen. The actual tunica media, in this case, this particular arteriole is about 2 or 3 cell layers thick. There may be a couple of elastic fibers in there. You still have the tunica intima, the endothelial layer, and we have a tunica adventitious. So even in vessels this small, we have our 3 vessels, layers to the vessel wall. Okay. In fact, look how small. Can you guys see this? This is this fiber over here. This is a skeletal muscle fiber. See that? So this arteriole is going in between batches or bundles of skeletal muscle fibers. Okay. Coming off of this arteriole will be little branches of capillaries that are even smaller. They will actually run in between these skeletal muscle fibers. Now, I'm going to talk about the, it's actually done, right? Okay, well, let's finish it here, and we'll just pick it up
Next week?
the classroom in like half an hour, 35 minutes-ish, something like that, okay? Certainly are I have a USB up here. This is it.
Oh, gosh.
Oh my God.